Today we're going to take a rib primal, a 7-bone ribeye section, break it down into the eye of the ribeye for roasting, into a slab of rib bones, into some ribeye steaks, and to rib cap, which is another steak. So this is a 7-bone, 15-pound USDA choice ribeye primal, which sold for $20 a pound, or a total of $300. Now this whole process is pretty well documented on AmazingRibs.com in my section on cooking beef roasts, and so you'll want to go there for more details and for more still pictures and a discussion as to why we're taking off the bones, why we're removing the fat, and how we season it and how we cook it. This video is strictly on prepping the meat. There's no cooking instructions in this video. After the strings are off, I'm going to take off the bones and the fat because they block the surface of the meat from the flavor. We're going to get the bones out of the way, and we're going to set those aside and make a great rib bone meal. We're going to smoke those and talk about that a little later. Now let's bust a persistent myth here. Bone does not add flavor when you are smoking, grilling, or dry roasting even in an oven. The outside of the bone is pure calcium, and calcium has no flavor. The inside of the bone has marrow, and that's full of flavor, and you can extract that when you simmer it, or you boil it, or you make a stew or a stock. But in dry heat cooking, like on a grill or in an oven, the bone does not add flavor, and in fact it subtracts flavor because it blocks the heat from getting to the surface of the meat, and you can't put seasoning on the surface of the meat. So you want to get the bone out of the way so there's more bare meat exposed to heat and exposed to the rub. Now there's plenty of meat in between those bones, and when you dry roast them, or smoke them as I like to do, either as a slab or individually, you can make a great meal. We've got this massive slab of meat and fat. Now let's start with the very end of this section here. This is called the nose. And as you can see, there's a little bit of meat and there's a lot of fat in there. Now the problem is if you leave all this fat on, when you serve it, your guests are going to remove the fat. And of course, if you put rub on top of the fat, there goes all your rub and flavor. Now remember, fat and water don't mix. Meat is 70% water, so the oil or the fat cannot penetrate the meat. Yes, fat is flavor, but it's the marbling inside the meat that creates the flavor. So we want to remove as much of the surface fat as we can so that when we put the rub on, it goes right on the meat. And that fat will not baste the meat. It'll run around on the surface of the meat, but it's not going to get in the meat, and it's not going to do the meat any favors. And of course, as I said, you'll lose all your rub when your guests carve it off. So we're going to start with the nose, and we're going to cut that off here. And you can see we're going to lose a little bit of meat, but we're not going to waste it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that little strip of meat that you see there, and I'm going to set it aside and chop it up and use it for stir fry or stew meat. When we're done, we're going to have this big slab of beautiful white fat, and we're not going to throw that away. We're going to save it. We're going to chop it up, and we're going to melt it down, and we're going to put it in a tub in the freezer, and we can use that to grind into burgers, or we could even use it to paint a steak as we're searing it, because it's the flavor of seared fat that makes a steak sing. So we've got all these nice hunks of fat. We're going to set that aside and render it down gently over low heat. Okay, now we have this huge section, which is mostly meat, except this thick fat cap. And so we're going to get rid of the fat cap. And we're just going to take a good sharp knife. A filleting knife is good. This is a boning knife, but a really good sharp knife. And run it under the fat cap, gently, trying not to remove much meat as we go, and pull off all this fat. Now you can see that after we get this surface fat off, there's a vein of fat running between two muscles. And that's, on the left, the eye of the ribeye. I'm going to flip it over here so you can see it again on the other end. Here, the left side is the rib cap, or the spinalis dorsi. On the right side is what's called the eye of the ribeye, or the longissimus dorsi. And the problem is the rib cap, as you can see in this roast here, it's so heavily marbled and it's so far out on the edge that it often overcooks and it's wasted and it just doesn't get come to its full potential. Also, there's this thick layer of fat underneath, which most people hate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the rib cap and set it aside, and you'll see it's a beautiful piece of meat about the size of a flank steak, and we're going to save it and cook it separately so that it can be cooked to dark on the outside and medium rare in the center and be absolutely spectacular and not overcooked, as you can see it almost always is on a rib roast. So removing the rib cap is fairly easy. You can actually do it without a knife most of the way. You can just get your fingers down into that thick fat layer and kind of pull it apart. And you can kind of hear the fat releasing. It kind of tears apart. And you don't have to be real strong to do it. You can do most of the way by hand. Sometimes having a little knife cut here and there helps. And you can see there's that seam of fat. Just work your way down that seam of fat. If you need to, make a little slice with the knife. And look at how it just slides away nice and easy. And at the bottom of the screen, you see the eye of the ribeye, the longissimus dorsi, and at the top is the rib cap that I'm removing. That's about 1/3 to 1/4 of the weight of the meat that's there. But that slab that I'm taking off there, look at that. Once I trim off the fat, it's about an inch, inch and a half thick, and about 5-6 inches wide, and it makes a fantastic steak. You cook it hot and fast, and it is almost as rich and fatty as Wagyu beef. It is more heavily marbled than the eye of the ribeye, and it makes it really special. It is the single best muscle on the steer. So you can see I'm removing the fat and the silver skin. So here we have what's left, and this is the eye of the ribeye. That's the longissimus dorsi muscle. And there's a little fat in there. You can remove some of it. But a lot of it is down into the meat. And so that'll melt and it'll be fine. I'm not going to mess with it much more. If you want to be fussy, you can take off some of these little spots of fat there. But a lot of it will melt off in the searing process. So there we go. Now, in order to get it to cook evenly, I'm going to kind of squish it together and try to make it as round as possible. And I'm going to tie it off. And we just use a regular old butcher string. Heck, you can use kite string, and it's pretty easy. You just tie it into knots. So I'm going to use 4 strings and tie it up in 4 different places, trying to make it as tubular as possible so it cooks evenly on all sides. And then I'm going to split it in half. That's a big roast, and I really don't need all that roast. And I'm going to split it in half so I can have 2 smaller roasts. And in fact, if you want, You can even take that smaller roast and cut it into ribeye steaks. And that's where the ribeye comes from, the rib roast or the prime rib. And so here we go. We've got a nice inch and a half thick ribeye steak. And that's going to make a beautiful grilled meal. Trim a little of that fat off of there. And you've got yourself one heck of a nice ribeye steak. And so now I'm pretty much done with trimming up this baby. Here's the final product in food saver bags for storage in the freezer. And here are some of the cooked products. This is a slab of the rib bones. That's gorgeous. Low smoked. Here's some of the rib bones cooked individually, grilled. Ribeye steak. Rib cap. Oh, this was one of the best steaks I ever ate. The roasts on the grill, searing. And there's the ribeye roast final. Ain't she beautiful? So come on down to AmazingRibs.com and type into the little search box beef roast or prime rib, and you'll find a whole page, fairly lengthy page, in which we discuss how to approach cooking this roast, the theory behind it, and a lot more about how to trim up and prepare this roast. It is a marvelous piece of meat. Certainly as a roast, one of the most festive meats you can serve, guaranteed to draw oohs and ahs from the audience.